Give me a camera to flirt with, an Oscar, I deserve it. The lights, the fame, the press, this game I play it every day.
And hello everyone, it is Peter Sam, the Narrow Gauge Engine here, back again with yet another video. Thomas and Friends is home to a variety of opinions amongst the wider fandom, such as which season is best, which characters are the greatest, and most importantly for today, which episodes are the most and least preferred. Today we discuss the least favoured episodes from each season of Thomas and Friends according to IMDB, that site where you can rate things with stars, such as episodes of Thomas and Friends. Of course, the most favoured version of the video will be made at some point too, and don't worry, I also have plans to talk about the worst character from each season, because I did the best and I forgot to do the sequel, which is the worst. With all that said, let's just dive on in. Due to my season 1 viewer ranking video, I knew what was going to be the lowest rated episode from these 26, and my prediction came true as Thomas and the God only got 7.2 stars in comparison to the other episodes, which were seeing upwards of 8.7s. To be fair, it's impressive this episode got this high as it really does do a lot wrong, but those are the perks when you're an Audrey story. I've discussed this episode numerous times on the channel previously, so if you'd like to know my thoughts on it, you can check out videos such as my Season 1 re-ranked video, my top 10 worst classic era episodes video, in which I go into a bit more depth. But in short, I do agree that this episode is the weakest of the season, and it rightly deserves a spot on the list. Similarly, I knew what the Season 2 pick was going to be due to my viewer ranking video on the season. Of course, it's better late than never, with 7.3 stars. Again, still fairly high considering how unlikable both protagonists are, and how the episode structure doesn't really account for the moral very well. For me, the only enjoyment comes from the viaduct sequence at the beginning, and not much else really sticks out as rather fun. I know I just recently made a video praising Christopher Audrey for some of his more overlooked but stellar works, but man oh man, he dropped the ball with this one. I'm fairly confident the only reason it was adapted over the likes of Drip Tank, a far better story, is that they needed something to replace the missing coach, and using Drip Tank would end the Thomas and Percy rivalry, which would make no sense considering Ghost Train and Woolly Bear were yet to come. Plus, it is rather easy to film as the episode doesn't really require any unique sets, or not many new props at least. I know the viaduct scene had a few different props on there. And no, I don't think Daisy is the replacement episode for the missing coach either, and if you want to know why, I can go into that another time, because that's not what this video is about, and I'm spending way too much time talking about an episode that really does not deserve it. So let's move on. Season 3's worst rated episode was actually somewhat of a shock to me, and I'm sure a bit of a shock to some of you, as I was sure Tender Engines would be a bit higher rated, but at the same time I completely understand why it may have disappointed some fans like myself. In comparison to the Railway series story, Tenders for Henry, this episode feels almost nothing like it really, as the whole Gordon segment is so alien to what happens in the book. The Flying Scotsman doesn't speak and only his tenders are seen, and Gordon seems to have no idea who he is in spite of him clearly having strong ties to the character, literally everywhere else in the franchise. Plus, instead of this Topham Hatt scene where Gordon finds out his brothers have died, we get this scene of Diesel talking about Diesel's taking over. The Henry stuff in the second half is fine, but that's it. It's accurate enough, but then again, that was never the highlight of the original story. All in all, whilst I definitely disagree as there is much worse in the season, I can understand why this one ended up being rated as low as it did overall. What I'm more baffled about is the fact that Thomas Gets Bumped wasn't at the bottom, to be honest. Mind That Bike was expectedly Season 4's lowest rated episode with 7.7 stars, as in comparison to the finale episodes of the first 3 seasons, this one really does not measure up all that well. Coming off the back of the Christmas trilogy with a basic and menial Christopher Audrey story will definitely do you no favours, but yes, there are some great moments in this episode undoubtedly. The charming montage of Tom Dipper travelling around in his van across Soda is not only the closest thing we'll ever get to a Thomas Postman Pat crossover, but it's also just so beautiful due to the lighting, set design and props. The narrative itself, though, leaves a lot to be desired, and as I said when coming off the back of episodes like Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree, and you receive this, it does just feel like a complete downgrade. Predictably, Season 5's lowest rated episode is one that is unsurprising despite me assuming another episode would take its place, and that is Gordon and the Gremlin. Now on paper I think this could have been a good episode with us learning the identity of Sir Topham Hatt's mother and further lore being added to this universe, but it is just because the flip-flopping plot really does not suit the minuscule runtime and really makes this episode feel rushed when in comparison to others out there. 1 minute it's Percy going on about gremlins in the turntable, the next it's Gordon collecting the VIP, then we're focused on Dowager Hatt's dog, and then it's Thomas getting that lore reveal. What an absolute mess of an episode, no wonder it's rated so low. Next up is Season 6, and I know what episode or episodes you may be expecting to see to appear on the list, but this is where you'd be wrong, and is sort of why this video even exists in the first place. I mean, if you have all the predictable picks for this, I mean, it's gonna be fucking boring. Rusty Saves the Day is the pick here, and it's not like this is too much of a mindfuck, but I reckon we were all expecting Middle Engine or Buffer Bother to take the spot. Why this episode is here is most likely due to the characterizations of Skarloey and Rhaenyra as very downtrodden and upset at a point where they should be at their most determined. These pair have faced the closure of the railway before, and should be more prepared and not spend time wallowing in self-pity. As well as this, these two engines are said to have their own branch line, which is never brought up again, and is also not a part of the established canon at all. It just feels like the writers just bent the lore just cuz, and that's disappointing to see. Although I will say the characters of Rusty and Elizabeth do hold the episode in higher regard for me, because their dynamic is great and their willingness to help those in need is incredibly heartwarming. Hi peeps, this is future Peter Sam going back and editing my fucking recording. See, what happened was, I wrote that ages ago. All of this script that you're listening to me read out, I did that a few months ago, back when I thought I could still keep up. And so now I'm going around and doing it. Some of these things might be out of date, with Season 6 being a good example, because it's no longer Rusty Saves the Day that's the worst one, it's Middle Engine, which, I mean, sort of puts a fucking nail in that comment I made about it being fucking unpredictable sometimes. That got 5.5 stars, so yeah, well, the actual worst episode of the season got the fucking spot, so that's great. I'll come back in every so often when my fucking shit is out of date, and I gotta remind you all. This could be the longest fucking thing I've ever done. But yeah, anyway, it's Middle Engine actually, not Rusty Saves the Day, but it was at the time. At one point in time, Rusty Saves the Day was the worst IMDB Season 6 episode. But it's not anymore. I'm gonna go now. Again, with another shock twist of fate for Season 7, the pick here is not what you'd expect, with that probably being the Old Bridge. Whilst yes, that episode did score low with 6 stars, it wasn't quite as low as another narrow gauge episode this season, Rhaenyra and the Roller Coaster, with 5.5 stars. There was a time when I said this was one of the best of the season, and whilst I no longer think that, I think it still has some good points. I like how the camera work makes these flat sets look like towering gradients. The music's good too. Yeah, that's about all I can think of that makes this episode worthy. The plot's incredibly null and was done better by Percy and the oil painting in Season 9, both having plots with the main character needing to impress a human character, or a group of human characters, by showing them the sights of Sodor, but them not really being impressed until the climax. But Percy in the oil painting has Percy snap at the snoozy painter by defending Sodor, which is far more satisfying than Rhaenyra just accidentally becoming a runaway. But then he just doesn't even really try to stop, it seems. It's so odd. There is worse in this season, I still stand by that, but this episode is still on the weaker side. As I've said before, there's no bad episode in this lineup in my opinion, just heavily flawed ones, and this episode falls into that category. Coming in with an absolutely measly 4.4 stars for Season 8 is Thomas Gets It Right, and whilst this one isn't horrendous or anything, it certainly is on the duller side. It's not Thomas and the Circus dull, but it is still dull all the same. The moral's very blatant, the 3 strikes formula is prevalent, and Thomas having to take care of his train is a repetitive plot used over and over again. All in all, I get it, even if I do have slight nostalgia for this one being on the Incredibles DVD. The stars only go down as we venture further into the hit era. I'm seeing 3.7s, 3.3s, but nothing got as low for Season 9 as the much hated episode Skarloey the Brave. This doesn't even feel like Skarloey, and that is obvious to anyone who watches any classic era episode even featuring him. Even the Old Bridge, he's this reckless daredevil now, so far removed from the sage character of times gone by, and we can't even argue that this is some sort of origin story, because characters that shouldn't be there if that's the case are there. And in speaking roles too, so we can't even argue that cameos don't count. This episode blows. Who is that bloke running around with Skarloey's skin on? Leatherface, is that you? When looking through Season 10's catalogue of episodes, I genuinely thought it could be pretty much 75% of the episodes as the bottom pick, and it would not surprise me, just because Season 10 isn't the best quality. But then I found it, the episode, and I was like, yep, nothing's doing worse than that. And that episode is Edward Strikes Out. It makes sense really, Edward's so far removed from his gentler and wiser personality here, and his disdain for Rocky is extremely disheartening and pisses all over what we knew him as really. Plus it's really wild that this is brought on by Gordon of all characters, the guy who Edward tried to be as different from as possible because Gordon's a nightmare of an engine. It does just miss the mark really, and rightfully in my opinion deserves this title as IMDb's least favourite from this season. I reckon you'd have bet your house that Don't Be Silly Billy would have been the pick for season 11. However, I'm sorry to disappoint, but we have another Scarlet story on here with Scarlet Storms Through. I feel like this one's less egregious than Brave because he's less of a douche, but this is still painful really. It's like choosing to be shot over being stabbed because being shot is a quicker experience. Once again, Scarlet is represented poorly, this time as a childish scaredy cat, which is pretty far from both his daredevil personality and his wiser personality. With these hit seasons, it does just seem to be that the character butchering is what makes a bad episode for these IMDb users, and that's pretty understandable. Scarlet Storms Through is a big offender of this too, and that is why it made the list. Of course, Push Me Pull You is the pick for season 12 with a record-breaking 1.9 stars. As much as I've said I don't think this is the worst that the hit era has given us by far, even off Scarlet I do still think it's bad and can understand why so many people do perceive it as the worst. Scarlet's personality is still awful, and at the end of the day, despite that runaway sequence having the potential to be great, it wasn't fully met by the crew working on the episode. This one will always be considered by a great majority to be battle round, and as I said, I get it. Now on to the Brenner era and the worst rated episode for its first season. Season 17 is a pick that I don't fully agree with, but I still think it's a bad episode, and that is Steamy Stafford with 4.9 stars. What positive things are there to say with this one other than it's not as bad as other episodes within this era? Stafford is extremely childish, and the whole concept of making puffing noises with his mouth is just extremely weird. Plus with the added other episodes where other characters learn their failings can be strengths, this one really doesn't do a whole lot. So it makes sense to me why this one was rated far lower than the others. The pick for season 18 as the worst episode is one that I think is a bit divisive, not just for me but for the whole community. Some people will definitely agree with this pick, and whilst I personally cannot, I cannot deny the failings that this one brings to the table. And those are what most likely cement it as the worst in the eyes of the IMDb users. And that episode is Signals Crossed. Now yes, whilst it is definitely very poor in its portrayal of Toby himself, I'd argue that it still gets a free pass, because it gets to show us his very complex relationship with Henrietta. Although Toby not knowing how signals work is a bit concerning, I must admit. Another unsurprising pick for season 19 with the infamous Henry Spots Trouble. Henry is characterised so poorly in this episode, being afraid of chickenpox of all things. Now I'm not certain of the biology of a steam engine with a face, but I'll tell you something, and that's that I'm pretty sure that steam engines can't get chickenpox. I think that's one of the most simple and obvious things ever, but not to this fucking loser apparently, because Henry just full on panics, dashing to and fro from engines he believes have the ailment. It's his lack of rationality and thought that really weakens Henry's character in this episode, but as well as that, the whole plot is uninteresting and irritating. I'm glad it was the pick, but I'm not glad that I have to talk about it again. Once again, another pick I hands down agree with for season 20, that being my pick for the worst Brenner era episode with 3 steam engines gruff. This episode sucks. The plot could have been interesting if it leaned properly into the spooky aspect. The use of the Billy Goat's gruff story being mentioned within the episode and then later being used as a plot device is so painfully cringe, and the characters of Toby and Percy have both been butchered to become terrified and wimpy, a far cry from their more resilient classic era personalities. And no, Toby's discovery does not count. I'd like to see you left at an old mine at night and you start hearing spooky shit after someone told you it was haunted. Anyway, yes, 3 steam engines gruff is awful, and if you want more clarification on why, my top 10 worst Brenner era episodes video is right there for the taking. Finally, with season 21 is an episode that I wasn't all that surprised to see is rated as the worst because of what it meant for the series. But as an episode itself, it wasn't all that bad really. A Shed for Edward has obviously been rated 3.3 stars because of its removal of the much beloved main character Edward. He goes off to sleep at Wellsworth, which is a sensible decision considering his branch line begins there, but it does in fact mean that he is no longer a member of the Steam team and has been booted off in favour of the spawn of Blubber. As an episode though, I wouldn't say this one is all that bad, just kind of mid once again, but I can 100% understand people's reservations when it comes to this one because of what it means for the future of the franchise. Although let's be fair, the AEG reboot is far worse. And so we've reached the end of another fun-filled video here on the channel. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and comment so that I can feel inclined to make more videos for you all in the future. In the meantime, I've been Peter Sam, you've been you, and I'm off to do an overnight challenge at the old gold mine. I'm ready to get spooked and play with the Weggy board. Bye bye.